All right, we're going to go ahead and get started here today. Hope all of you had a nice Thanksgiving. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the Respiration Project. But before we do so, I just wanted to go over a few points on respiration, talk a little bit about our objectives, and then talk about what's coming down the pike here the next couple of weeks. Hopefully, by the time you get done with this project, by the time you've gone through the lesson, you are capable of identifying the three stages of cellular respiration. Okay. You're able to distinguish between processes that are aerobic and processes that are anaerobic, and then being able to recognize that respiration is really responsible for the breakdown and use of the food that organisms eat. Um, let's take a few minutes here and let's talk about respiration from a lesson perspective. And I'm going to just pop this up here real quick. This is just a couple of quick slides. When you think about the process of respiration, okay, um, you really need to dive into the overall equation for the respiration process. Okay, earlier on in the year we talked a lot about photosynthesis, um, and what you're going to see is some similarities in terms of how organisms manipulate the equation between photosynthesis and respiration. Um, but if you think that both photosynthesis um, and oxygen production are the only processes that are performed, you need to broaden your horizons a little bit and understand that food assimilation to produce energy and waste products are really a big part of life processes. So when we're looking at respiration as a whole, it's carried out by both plants and animals. Okay, it doesn't have a time. It doesn't have a timetable or a set point. It's an energy producing. It's an exergonic reaction, and it's also a catabolic process in that it degrades. Okay, and the goal, the product of this is to take the sugars or the carbohydrates that an organism ingests, break them, disassemble them through the process of catabolism, um, and make ATP in the form of an exergonic reaction. Okay, so how is that accomplished? Is essentially accomplished through this equation, okay, by breaking down glucose in the presence of oxygen to produce carbon dioxide, water, and energy. Okay, and I say down here, notice that it mirrors the photosynthesis reaction, which we talked about earlier in the year. Okay, and we'll investigate this a little bit more later. But the stages of respiration are really what I wanted to just touch on here before we go any further. Okay, um, when you talk about respiration, its name is given to the metabolic pathways in which the cells harvest energy from food. Okay, so the processes can be either aerobic or anaerobic. In some stages require oxygen abundance, and some stages don't require oxygen abundance. Okay, so when you look at this, the three stages: glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. Okay, um, we'll talk about real briefly what these stages encounter as you go through this. So let's take a look here at glycolysis. Okay, the first stage of respiration is glycolysis, and this is essentially the sugar splitting stage. This is where glucose is cleaved in half, okay, to form a compound that'll later be moved over into the Krebs cycle to be used to help make some more ATP. But with this, glycolysis is an anaerobic process. It really doesn't matter if oxygen is present, okay? And you take a six carbon sugar, you cleave it or you split it down to two 3 carbon compounds of pyruvate, which are used next, and the results end up with 2 molecules of ATP and 2 molecules of NADH, which are energy carriers, which are going to be used later on in the process down to the electron transport chain, okay? Um, The Krebs cycle, which is the second stage, or we also call it the citric acid cycle, this is where you take that sugar that was split from glycolysis um, in the form of pyruvate and make carbon dioxide. And while you're making the carbon dioxide, which is one of the products of the respiration equation, you're also making other energy intermediates like NADH and FADH2, in addition to what the end product is making the ATP. Okay, so you can see the results of this here below, and this occurring in the mitochondria, which then leads you to the final stage where the electron transport chain occurs. And this is really the heavy hitter in the process. Okay, sometimes you'll hear this in upper level biology classes referred to as oxidative phosphorylation. Um, what happens here is you actually, when you're phosphorylating something, okay, you're using oxygen and you're using phosphorus um, as intermediates, as energy intermediates, to create a gradient by which an energy molecule, in this case ATP, can be made, okay? And we call that chemiosmosis. So think of it as a staircase, okay? Think of this electron transport chain as basically a staircase where electrons kind of tumble down it, okay? Um, and at the same time they're tumbling down it, okay, um, that energy is passed to oxygen, which helps make water, and at the same time you make water, you're making ATP as you're tumbling down the stairs. Okay, so those are really the big heavy hitters in terms of respiration. You're making lots of ATP molecules. You're giving off carbon dioxide. Um, while you're using oxygen and sugar. So, how does this all relate to our project? So, let's go over here and take a look at this project real briefly, okay? So, this Respiration of Muscles project says that respiration is essential for life. It's a process that helps all of life's metabolic functions, okay? Oxygen is a huge part of this, okay? And what your job is going to be to do is to conduct an activity that involves oxygen and the process of cellular respiration. So, what does it ask you to do? It asks you to jump up and down on one leg for as long as you can. Now, here's my disclaimer for this. For any of you that have any physical um, disabilities that would prevent you from doing this, I would encourage you to come in and see me before you do anything, and we'll talk about an alternative to this. But those of you that are capable, this doesn't require anything strenuous. Um, but jump up and down on one leg for as long as you can. Okay. Um, the other thing you can do, if you're not one to jump up and down, if you want to do push-ups, if you want to do sit-ups, you're going to be essentially doing the same process. You just want to be doing some sort of moderately strenuous activity for as long as you can. And then while you're doing that, think about the process of respiration that you read in your lesson and that we talked about. And then you're going to answer two very simple questions. One, I want you to be as descriptive as you can and describe how your leg began to feel from the time you started all the way to the time that you end. Okay? I want you to describe that process to me in detail from start to finish. Okay? And then the second part to this is I want you to explain why this feeling occurred using what you've discussed, okay, and read over in the lesson as it relates to respiration. Think about the three processes. Think about glycolysis, think about the Krebs cycle, think about the electron transport chain, and then I want you to take one step farther and think about what we didn't talk about, but what your lesson talked about, lactic acid fermentation, okay? That's going to be a key in this as well. So think about that as well and craft your response using that, okay? I'm not asking for a long, lengthy project, two short paragraphs. The first part can be one or two sentences. The second part should be probably 3 to 5 sentences, being able to explain the process to me and what occurred while you were jumping up and down on your leg. Um, you can either write that in the answer key, or you can create a Word document and attach it, or you can email it to me, whatever is easiest for you. And we will be back here next week talking a little bit more about cellular energy and how energy flows in ecosystems. If you have trouble with the project or anything else during the week, I'd encourage you to come on in and see me. And we'll be back here next Monday doing another short lesson. Have a great week, everyone.